Hi, my name is MJ Preston. This is Thriller and Suspense, the podcast. Welcome. Hi, how you doing? MJ Preston here. It's been a little bit of time since I've been out and done a podcast, but I've got a guy I've been kind of anticipating talking to about this book because I was lucky enough to get an advance reader copy from him and I read it. But before we get into that, I'm going to introduce Don Sawyer, the author, to you. Don is an American transplant to Canada. He's published over 14 books, and he's done everything from young adult to adult fiction to nonfiction. And he has two best-selling novels. One is called Where the Rivers Meet. You got a copy of that, Don?
I do. Just happen to have it here.
Best-selling Canadian novel. And then he also did an adult nonfiction book called Tomorrow is School. And
I just happen to have that one here too. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Okay, but what we're here to talk about today is Don's latest endeavor, and it's kind of strange because you've moved into a realm of urban fantasy and kind of old school science fiction with a book called The Burning Gem. And I was wondering if you could give us a little introduction to what that is about.
And there's that cover, Jim, and it's a lovely cover, Mark. And first of all, I really want to thank you for having me on. And you said you were lucky enough to get a pre-pub copy, but you were very kind at taking the time to read it, and I really appreciated your comments and your feedback. That, as you know, with an indie publisher, in this case, I'm going with a small publisher, Castle Gate, which has been a great team to work with. But they have limited resources. So, having other authors like you endorse a book like this means a lot. Anyway, yeah, well, thank you very much for having me on. I've been amazed at the infrastructure you have for promoting books, and having an opportunity to talk with you is something I've been looking forward to as well.
Well, okay, so the book is, as I said, is kind of like an urban fantasy. I'm going to give you my because I read it. I really did enjoy it. It was a great book. It was a lot of fun, very interesting. I actually can't wait for the second book because there is a second book. But we'll talk about that later. I'll just throw my review out there. One of the blurbs I did, I noticed it was on your bookmark. Thank you, by the way, for putting me on your bookmark. Sawyer has crafted a remarkable universe centered around the trade of mystical gems that contain fragments of one soul managed by gangsters endowed with supernatural abilities and connections to other dimensions. That
couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, well, okay, and so let's unpack that, because basically this is an urban fantasy that is an awful. It has, for me, it has an old school science fiction feel. It feels Lovecraftian. It feels Lovecraftian.
Lovecraft, my goodness, how did we forget that? Well, see, that's really good point, because you and I kind of grew. I mean, I can remember growing up with Lovecraft before people. Well, I mean, he wrote in the early 1900s. Curious man, obviously, but he created this whole world, and that's a good observation of sort of evil, and he had his own secret book of magic that people kept looking for because he was so believable in his writing that so I always loved that stuff.
What we've got here though is we've got like a secret society.
Yeah,
where they're trading almost like black market. That you get a piece of your soul put into this gem.
Yeah.
And you have a gem maker. So I really like the universe that you created. Okay. And I just want to mark down some of the characters, because basically our protagonist is a woman named Barbara Steubenville, and she goes to get one of these gems because they have money. I mean, this is something that rich people do, right? They go to get their soul put into a gem by a gem maker. So
well, if I can just jump in for a minute, they don't go. They are identified. We don't know how. The gem maker doesn't even know how. He's just directed to these people. And later we find out it's this evil cabal that's behind all of this.
Yeah.
It's able to identify individuals who have special powers, which they can accelerate through these gems and accelerate for their own purposes, which we only find out about later.
Right.
So he appears on her doorstep.
Can you tell us a little bit about Barbara?
Yeah, well, she's a really interesting woman. She keeps going back to the fact that she's uh, an Aries, and of course he says, well, that's the gym maker who's turns out to be 110 years old. But he says, surely that's pseudoscience. He said, not when you're a kid. It opens up sort of new worlds, new ways of looking at the world, new ways of seeing yourself. And so she always saw herself as this sort of fiery individual that never ignited. And so she's always been kind of repressed and suppressed in her home. And then she falls for this scurrilous lawyer because he actually pays attention to her, and then he turns out to be not only abusive but just an all-around jerk. And of course, he's having an affair with his secretary, just like he was with her. And he says to her, "Don't start with me on I can't remember her name, my secretary. She's the best legal secretary in town." He said, "Is she legal? Just barely, I'll bet." So it's that kind of relationship. She's obviously brighter and more aware than he is, and he can't stand the independence she begins to manifest. But at the same time, he's physically threatening. So she realizes that with the appearance of this spectacular, miraculous gem that she feels is genuinely a part of her and really contains something very special, that this is a door to a new world. And she pursues it with incredible vigor, including braving the tunnels of the New York subway to find this secret abandoned subway station.
Well, and if I could just interrupt you for a second, and that's what one of the things I loved about it was that whole idea that this gentleman, the gem maker, first reveals himself with the name D'Angelo, and he makes her gem. Now, what I thought was fascinating about the setup is okay, you could see there was already some kind of an attraction, even in the first meeting with them. But what I thought was fascinating was they said, when you get this gem made, you have to keep it with you. And if you don't pay the money that you said you were going to pay, or you haggle with it, we're going to smash it and it will kill you. The gem will literally kill you. So it's kind of a little bit of a commentary too on people with money, the things that, that we will acquire because for vanity's sake.
Exactly.
But she seemed, you get a lot of sense of that. I really enjoyed that because I understood Barbara almost right out the gate going in, that she's at the end of her marriage, really. Even getting the gem is almost a way of fulfilling this hole in her, so that she, because that's what people do, right? So Barbara was very interesting. And then, of course, this D'Angelo character, he starts out a little dry in the beginning. He's very gentlemanly in his language, he calls her madam. Yes, I mean, constantly through, even as there starts to become a bit of sexual tension between the two, still calling her madam. So there's that. And I thought what was fascinating, when she gets this gem, she becomes kind of not obsessed with him, but all of a sudden she follows him into his world. And
I'm not sure obsessed isn't a bad word. I mean, she becomes not only obsessed with him, but she recognizes this is her way out. I mean, the desperation that she feels, and this is pretty magical stuff that suddenly lands on her doorstep. And she says, geez, I know this guy has something special. She talks about, the song from, was it Heart? He's a magic man. And this guy offers me something that I can't obtain otherwise, but it's a way out of this horrible situation I'm in. So she does become almost obsessed with it.
It is an age-old story, though, isn't it? I mean, when people are unhappy, sometimes they'll gravitate towards things that are even dangerous.
Something addictive, something harmful. But he gives her this very cryptic clue about how to find him, and she has to interpret this. And of course, it means going on hidden railways to hidden stations, and so she shows a lot of bravery and not only determination, and just even finding the guy in the first place.
And I like how you slowly reveal this, because you see D'Angelo, and you realize that he's working for a very shady organization. And as you find out more about them, I mean, they're vicious killers, they're gangsters basically. But there's something beyond that. And you know, without really revealing too much, there's a whole other world, and that's where the Lovecraftian thing kind of came in from. It's strange too because I just read a book by author Gord Rollo, which was called Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, and it had a Lovecraftian, and it was gangsters as well, but it was more of a commentary on Lovecraft, and that's where I kind of made the connection with your novel. Although I read your novel before his, and like I said, you're kind of going down this rabbit hole with them, and you know you're going to be going down there. But the character's very good. So the other character I really kind of liked, and he's kind of a formidable character, was Victor. And Victor is kind of like, well, he's also an enforcer for this group. Right?
Exactly. And the Mester, we find out this sort of this horrific character who's physically appalling and absolutely ruthless. And has used. It turns out that there's a whole network of these gym makers, of which D'Angelo was only one. And the Mester uses Victor as his enforcer, and in fact killed two of the gym makers because he won't brook any kind of opposition. The Mester is absolutely, and it turns out that each of them has been recruited because of their situation, desperation, loneliness. They're suicidal. They're alone. They have nothing else to lose, and this guy finds them and brings them into this cabal, and almost without exception, they're well paid. But we also find out that their own gyms enhance those feelings of impotence, of loneliness, of sadness, and so in that way he keeps them as his servant, really, and they're desperately afraid of breaking out of this circle of influence. And that's what the story is really about, is how Barbara sort of explodes unexpectedly into his world and forces him to actually confront what he's part of.
A world in which she's not really welcome either.
No, initially, because he's not allowed to touch people. He's not allowed to give his real name. And this is all part of his contract. So that he's paid well to make gyms for up and coming influencers as long as he remains totally isolated from the rest of the world. So then he stops doing that because Barbara breaks through that shell, and then all hell breaks loose, literally.
Yeah, literally. Well, the other interesting aspect I liked about it is that these people or this society, they have actually pretty much taken control of. They basically they can do the Star Trek thing. They can jump from England into the United States by walking through a door or passing from one dimension into another. And then of course there's the market itself, this society that you begin to find about, which I found was really fascinating because everything seems to be in D'Angelo's world, and you learn a lot more about D'Angelo. I won't release that because I don't want to spoil the book for everybody. Is all about balance. There's a balance there, and so while the bad guys can start shit and kill people and do horrible things, and with the master, he tortures people before he kills them. In the market, there's kind of a rule that you can't just go in there and start a bunch of crap. So it's neat how they kind of use the market as cover and stuff like that as well.
As cover, and I also wanted to make it as a if you would, a bit of a utopian community. It's actually based on a real abandoned subway station that was started in the 1830s, and then it was never completed, of course, in New York. And there really is this old station there, and there are miles of original lines that were built before it was halted, and people don't even know about it. So this market is the idea that people had found this abandoned through old records. They found this gigantic abandoned station that's bigger than Grand Central Station, and it attracted these oddities, these misfits, these outliers who had special skills, special talents, special knowledge, and it became a kind of a refuge. And so they created this society, this not perfect society, because people argue and all that, but a society where there's equality, where it's run democratically, where people jointly market their goods and then divide the profits equally, where they're capable of defending themselves when they are faced with an outside attack, as it turns out. And so there's this voluntary syndicate that incorporates hundreds of people from all over the world, all different backgrounds, in this society that works, that they make work. And so I wanted to show that, as you said, as a counterpoint to which we later encounter in the second book, which is the exact opposite of that. And so this becomes the center of their operation as they begin to fight against this evil force that they're not even fully aware of what it is or who it is. So that kind of evolves over the course of the book.
Well, like I said, it reminds me that I think probably Stephen King did a book called The Talisman with he did a series of books called The Gunslinger, which were all set in alternate reality. And Talisman was kind of crossing over into that alternate reality. So there was I kind of got a little bit of nostalgia with that. But like I said, what I found interesting about this is this would really actually make a really good Netflix series. It really would, because I think what you're building on here, and what I've seen so far, is you really are building a universe here. But there's a lot of different ways that you can go with this in the future. I mean, Barbara and D'Angelo, yes, we're going to see it to its fruition of what their story arc is going to be and what's going to happen. But there's so many other possibilities from this book. I really enjoyed it. It was
I'm so glad, because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I try to, all of my work, obviously everybody tries to write as well as they can, but I really wanted to try to develop characters that were real and believable, who face real conflicts, not just external conflicts, which a lot of, unfortunately, urban fantasy does. You're fighting dragons or something, but also dealing with the real inner conflicts that we do. I mean, this woman is desperate for a change. What does she do? How does she get out of a bad marriage? What options does she have? This guy is literally boarded himself up into a world that's comfortable but horrible and full of sorrow. How does he break out of it? This is a relationship between these two people who are about as opposite as they could be, and yet they grow together to care about each other and to depend on each other. How does that relationship grow and develop? And as I also want to make clear, is that part of the idea behind all of this is this, the most wonderful science fiction writer I think ever lived was Ursula Le Guin. And she talked about science fiction, which is a little different from urban fantasy, as a thought experiment. She started off with, what if as a species, we can see that we're confronted with numerous existential threats, but we seem to be incapable of finding the capacity to come together, to work together, to solve these issues together. Is that just because we haven't evolved far enough? Or could it be that there's a certain force that is at work to encourage the divisions that keep us apart, whether they're religious or tribal or national divisions, class divisions? What is it that's keeping us apart? Could it be that there's actually an element of, I mean, that sounds like a conspiracy, but I mean, it's like, I think that there are forces at work who have an interest in keeping us from finding our commonality.
Well, just to use that as an example, and we're not going to go off on it because MJ Treston Thriller and Suspense is political and social justice free, just because they're flashpoints. But to say that, I mean, in regard to your story, if you look at any demographic where there are people that start a society, there is always an unsavory element that tries to exploit that. If you go into New York City be in Harlem or in some of the rougher areas, the Bronx in New York City, there are very poor people, but there are people that are willing to exploit their own people to do that. And that, I mean, this is kind of the parallel with Burning Gem, is you've got this utopian society, but then there's the gangsters outside that society that work into that society and actually, they're exploiting it, right? So there's always always exploiters as well.
I think urban fantasy, that's what I like about urban fantasy. It's this, that there's enough of you have shoes in two worlds. The world of, walking out your door and looking at the sun and the buildings around you, and then this magical world that just literally just underneath your feet, and they become kind of a reflection of each other, and so to me the best urban fantasy is able to create this magical world with a very direct connection to the world that we inhabit, and so this was my attempt to do that, and to explore these issues like what is evil, and what is morality, and what is bravery, and what do we do to get ourselves into these situations, and how do we get ourselves out? And that's a lot of what I wanted to show, the determination and the capacity of people to make change when they really want to, and this is what these guys are doing. And I think it's in an exciting way. It sounds like it's some kind of a sociology text, but I think the conflicts that they run into, and the unsavory characters that they constantly confront, even when they go to Budapest and into the ruin bars of Budapest and the dark streets of the city, and the gangsters that are there. I think there's real elements of mystery and tension and adventure mixed in with what I hope are some important commentaries.
Well, these are all elements that we all talk about, right? I mean, there's conflict. We see it every day, but I do like the fact that in Barbara's case, because you delve into Barbara a little bit deeper than you do D'Angelo, or at least at this point in the book where I'm referring to, and you make her believable. You made her very likable, flawed, and sometimes freaking irritating too, because she had those traits about her. There's her insecurities, but she is a little bit, in the beginning at least, a prima donna, right? Like, she is still a rich guy's wife. She is still, like I said, trying to fill that void with this gem. Coming back to the gem, how the Master, and just for anybody that's listening, the Master is like the arch villain in this story. He controls everything with all these gem makers, right? He's the godfather. And I'm interested to find out what they get from the gems in the end, because clearly it's not just a matter of giving you a gem with your soul, a piece of your soul in it, so it burns a certain. They got to be more than just money getting out of this, particularly the message. Can you give any of that away, or?
Well, yeah. Toward the end of the first book, we find out that the Master has entered into a power relationship with a shadowy figure that appears in the middle of a shootout with the Budapest police shortly after World War II. And this figure has a brown cowl on, and nobody hears him speak, but the agent who D'Angelo and Barbara later connect with said, you knew what he was saying, and he recruited him. He said, you'll have more power than you've ever dreamed of. So that's the power. Yeah. And I think that's so often the case with people. I mean, people, billionaires and millionaires, they don't need more money. What is it? It's the power, it's the power. and people talk about power corrupting, but the former president of Uruguay had a great statement. He said, "Power doesn't corrupt. Power simply reveals your true character." So, I mean, I think that's what we're dealing with, are people whose character are driven by the need for power, and as opposed to people whose vision is one of greater equality and caring and that kind of thing. Which you were saying that about, well, I don't get into social issues, but you do. I mean, your books also reflect the reality of inequality. You talk about people, what conditions forced them into doing these things. You show bravery and you show determination, and those are all commentaries on people as well. And I don't mean to make this one heavy-handed, because I don't think it is. But I think you're rooting for these guys because they're on the right side.
Well, we write about what we see every day too, and that that may not even be by design. A lot of times that we write something that there is a social commentary to what we're writing. You mentioned, we talked about the master and they say that he's this evil being. But what is it? What is it about power? And when I wrote the Highwayman books, I did a lot of research on serial killers. And for most of these guys, it isn't even about the sex. It's about the power that they hold over the people that they murder, torture. And you've done a fantastic job with Burning Gem of doing that with these characters and bringing them to life, making people like them and want to learn more about them. So tell us when you're doing your book launch, but first tell us when the book goes live.
Book launch, okay. Book launch. Do we have our poster up there, Mark? Let's see here.
Oh, yes, there is a graphic that's going up right beside. Yeah.
Okay. This will be of particular interest to people in the St. Catharines area, mind you. But yeah, the 26th of June is going to be the book launch at a lovely cafe here called the Mate Cafe. I've got a magician coming in because, what would a book about magic be without a magician, to launch it, a musician. So even if people don't like the book, I think they'll have a good time. No charge. I'm hoping the books will get here by then, mind you. That would definitely be a plus. But yeah, that's on the 26th. The book itself is officially released on the 21st of May. It'll be available, and of course, through Amazon and hopefully through your local bookstore.
Right. Well, that's great. I mean, look, I wish you nothing but the best with it, Don. It is a great book. It definitely deserves to get the attention that we're giving it here today. And I hope people will go and check it out. It's a lot of fun. And like I said, some people refer to it as urban fantasy. I thought of it as old school sci-fi. I really enjoyed it very much. And I want to thank you for coming on. And, I haven't done a podcast in a little while. It's just because, like I say, I'm a time juggler and I've got books to write too. So, but thanks so much for the ARC. Once it gets out, we'll pump it up, and I wish you nothing but the best of luck with it.
Hey, Mark, thanks very much. I really enjoyed this. It was really fun. And again, I really appreciate your support. It's really encouraging to have support from other writers who can appreciate what you're doing and support it. And you're one of those. Thanks again. Thanks a lot.
Oh, no problem at all. Okay, so check out Don's book, The Burning Gem. It's fantastic. Don Sawyer, great author, well-established, best-selling author. But this is his first foray into this particular genre, and he's done a bang-up job. So check him out. We'll have all the dates, everything here on the podcast. Thanks for listening.